Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host, and we are super excited to share with you Bishop Barron's talk at Google. Now, I know many of you have been wondering when this talk would be available, and I know because we've received so many messages and emails and tweets asking, when can we listen to the talk? Bishop Barron was invited to visit the Google headquarters, aka the Googleplex, a few months ago to speak to Google and YouTube employees about the topic, religion and the opening up of the mind. It was a closed audience talk. It was not live streamed. It was not shared publicly. But today, we finally are able to share the talk with you. This week, we're going to hear the first half of his talk, which explores how religion does not shut down the mind. Instead, it enables the questing intellect, which seeks to find the source of its deepest longings. And Bishop Barron shows how those deepest longings ultimately converge to God. Next week, we'll share the second half of the episode along with the Q&A portion where he took questions from Google and YouTube employees. I think you're really going to love that. But for now, sit back and enjoy the first half of Bishop Barron's talk at Google.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for that nice introduction. And it really is a delight to be here at, you all know this, one of the most significant cultural centers really in the world. I've been very warmly received, so thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the great hospitality. I want to talk about religion and the opening up of the mind. Because very often religion sort of gets a bad rap. As superstitious, it's sub-rational, it's opposed to the mind. I'm going to argue, au contraire, just the contrary, that religion authentically construed is meant to open up the mind and the will. Okay, that's my goal today. A term that now is common parlance, but didn't exist when I was a young man, is search engine. And here we are at the headquarters of the most popular and powerful search engine on the planet. At our fingertips now, quite literally, is almost all the knowledge, all the wisdom, information that the human race has accumulated. And we can just press a button and up it comes. Just recently, I was with an older friend of mine, and he was mentioning the 1937 World Series. And he was convinced that Game 3 ended with a certain score, but wasn't sure what it was. I said, well, let's check Mr. Google. So, of course, we did, and up came the information about Game 3 of the 1937 World Series. Not that long ago, I was with someone else, and we were wondering about a passage in the Divine Comedy of Dante. And, of course, we were able to find it very quickly. Here's one. Now, there's maybe a few in the room old enough to remember the show F Troop. Remember that? From the 60s? Well, I got a few of you. I was with some friends from my, era, and we were arguing about the characters on F Troop. I said, well, let's ask Mr. Google. So up came the characters on F Troop. So you know that we have really at this extraordinary civilizational moment, the capacity to access the wisdom of the race. Now, see, search engine triggers for me an awful lot of resonances with religion. Now, how come? The mind, by an inner instinct, is restless, even relentlessly so, right? The mind searches for truth. And it finds a particular truth, like the ones I just mentioned. But does the mind ever rest at that point? No. The minute we find some truth, usually 12 more questions emerge. Think of the way we all surf the web, right? We go looking for something, but it leads us somewhere else, then somewhere else again, and then we find all this so fascinating, we forget what we were originally looking for. The mind is restless, even relentlessly so. It never rests, or if it does, it's the way a climber might rest on the side of the mountain just to catch his breath before heading back up, right? It searches. The more it knows, the more it wants to know. My great intellectual hero is St. Thomas Aquinas. And he spoke in the 13th century of the intellectus agens. That's his Latin. And usually it's transliterated into English as the agent intellect, which sounds rather, cold. See, agens in Latin is a participle. Doing, making, moving. Intellectus agens is the restless, searching mind. Now, where's it going, the intellectus agens? What's it looking for? Here I love the one-liner from the great Jesuit philosopher Bernard Lonergan. Lonergan says it's very simple. The mind wants to know everything about everything. Now, Google, this should be familiar to you, right? But that's the natural dynamism of the mind, not to know just this particular truth or that. Not just the conglomeration of all particular truths. The mind wants to know everything about everything. It wants not just particular truths. It wants the truth itself. It wants the source of reality itself. That's how hungry the mind is. Another Lonergan line is there's an emptiness like the emptiness of a box. It's kind of a dumb emptiness, just waiting to be filled. But there's also the emptiness of the stomach. It's empty, but it knows what it wants, right? The mind is empty at the beginning of life, but not like a box, more like a stomach. Intellectus agens, searching, until it comes to its fulfillment only in knowing everything about everything, the very source of reality. Okay? True of the mind, equally true of the will. The second great dynamic of the human spirit, the will. Now, the will seeks not the true, but the good. So right now, everyone in this room, we're all seeking the good in some way. So I'm seeking the good of speaking to you. You're seeking, I hope you find it, some good in my talk. You know, we talk about final causality. Aristotle made that distinction, right, between efficient causality, like a pushing cause. Think of all the physical sciences, the modern sciences are based upon efficient causality. Where do things come from? What brings them into being? But final causality, Aristotle thought was more important. That's the pulling cause, right? What attracts or lures things. Now, that's a talk for another day. We could debate final causality in nature. But I think no one would disagree that final causality obtains in our world. That we human beings are drawn by the good. It lures our wills. Okay, but remember the intellectus agens, the restless, seeking, never satisfied mind. Same is true of the will. Notice how any act of the will can be analyzed in a kind of Russian doll manner. Do you know what I mean? The one doll inside the other. That every particular act of the will, if we think about it, is situated in a broader and wider act of the will, which in turn is in a broader and wider, etc. Now, what am I talking about? Think about getting out of bed in the morning, right? So it's an act of the will, unless you fell out of bed. But if you get out of bed the normal way, it's an act of the will. You're seeking a good to start your day. But see, that good nests in a higher good. Why do you get out of bed? Well, I want to get to work. Okay. Why do you want to get to work? Well, I need to make money. Well, why do you need to make money? Well, I want to support myself and my family. Why do you want to support yourself and your family? Well, supporting my family leads to their flourishing. Well, why do you want that? Because my family flourishing makes me happy. And I want to be happy all the time and in an unconditioned way. Just as the mind won't rest until it knows everything about everything, so the will doesn't rest until it finds an unconditioned happiness. Now, analyze any act of the will that way. I send my car to the mechanic. Well, how come? So the car will run better. Well, why do you want that? So I can get to work and I'll do that analysis. Or so I can get to my friends more easily. Well, why do you want that? Well, being with my friends is a great good that makes me happy. And I want to be happy all the time and in an unconditioned way. I go to a basketball game. This is kind of easier to analyze. Well, why do you want that? Well, because basketball is interesting and beautiful. And contemplating it makes me happy. And I want to be happy all the time and in an unconditioned way. See, the will, if we analyze it sufficiently, is conditioned by a desire for beatitudo. I'm using this Latin term on purpose because it was Thomas Aquinas' term. Happiness. Beatus means happy in Latin. Beatitudo is the happiness I'm talking about, which is not the happiness that comes from a particular act of the will. Like, hey, I went to, Bishop Barron's talk. Yeah, it was okay. I liked it. It made me happy in a very limited way. Okay, I'll be happy if that's true. But then, see, analyze any act, including this one, and you'll eventually get to the desire at the ground of the will for beatitudo, unconditioned happiness. Now, here's an interesting thing, everybody. Prior to modernity, prior to the rise of the sciences, the principal question that preoccupied the minds of the best and brightest people in the West was the nature of beatitudo. See, what is it? So we all want it. And that's true, by the way, of the religious believer, of the agnostic, the atheist. Everybody wants beatitudo. It's the first mover of the will. So, what is it? And can I submit to you, there is no question more important than that. And see, one of the tragedies, I think, of our time is so often we bracket that question. Because we're so preoccupied with the achievements of our sciences, and God bless them. I'm all in favor of them, don't get me wrong. But we tend to bracket the question that prior to modernity, the best and brightest people thought was the most important. What is this beatitudo that all of us, at least implicitly, are seeking? Okay? And I want to give you a little bit now of Thomas Aquinas' analysis of this. You can find it, by the way, in the very beginning of the second part of his great Summa Theologiae, his summary of theology. It's interesting. Many years ago, there was a prominent Catholic cardinal who had a little quip that he often used. He said, "Good morality is like good art. It begins with the drawing of a line." Now, it's a clever line, but I think actually it's wrong. Because that's not the way Aquinas starts. The drawing of a line, like a law. I'm in favor of it, don't get me wrong. We have to get to drawing of lines. But Aquinas begins not with the law. That happens in question 90. Question one, and here he's just like all his pre-modern colleagues. Question 1, what is beatitudo? What is the happiness that is luring our wills? Okay? So he does a kind of process of elimination. He looks at 4 classical candidates. What great people have said and thought about the nature of beatitudo. So first he says, some people claim that wealth is beatitudo. To be rich sufficiently, to be sufficiently wealthy, that's the beatitudo that finally I'm seeking. Now, is that a legitimate position? Well, in a way, I get it. Lots of very smart people have said that. And may I submit, in our culture especially, you can find an awful lot of people, I think, that hold to that. If I just have enough, money in the bank, I have a big enough house, nice enough cars, I have a commodious life, I'll be happy. And that's, in fact, what I'm always implicitly desiring in all my acts of the will. True? Aquinas says, no. Wealth is a good, but it can't be the unconditioned good. How come? Well, he says, look, what does wealth mean? He says, wealth in the natural sense means, and let me give this a quote here that makes it sound kind of contemporary. He says, wealth serves as a remedy for our natural wants, such as food, drink, clothing, cars, dwellings, and such like. That's from the 13th century, but it sounds like today, doesn't it? What does wealth give me? It's a remedy for natural wants. So these natural wants, like I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm uncomfortable. And so wealth gives me food, drink, clothing, cars, dwellings, and such like. Goods? Yeah. But they can't be the ultimate good. Why? Because Thomas says those things are the condition for the possibility of much higher goods. And think about it for a second. Once you've discovered, you've found enough food and drink, you've got a shelter, you're living in a sort of comfortable, commodious way, then you can aspire to philosophy and science and friendship and conversation, these higher goods. Wealth is a proximate good. It can't be, therefore, the ultimate good. So that can't be beatitudo, what we're all implicitly seeking. Okay? Others have said beatitudo, happiness, consists in honors. Now think about it for a second. How many societies, both East and West, around the world, trans-historically, how many societies are predicated upon honor and shame, right? That the worst thing you can experience is to be shamed. And therefore, concomitantly, the best thing is to be honored. And I know lots of people whose lives are pretty much centered around the quest for honor. To be thought highly of, to be given titles and prerogatives, right? To be held up. Okay, is honor, though, beatitudo? And Aquinas says, no, it can't be. Why? Because honor, he says, is like a flag that we put on something good, noble, and virtuous. And so you notice someone who's got great ability or they're leading a virtuous life, and you want to put a flag on that to say, hey, everybody, look at that. That's worth emulating. That's honor. So think of titles and positions and prerogatives and so on. Signs of respect. They are flags of virtue or nobility. Therefore, they're derivative. They're secondary. What matters much more than honor are the things that are being honored, namely your virtue, nobility, and so on. Therefore, honor, good thing, sure. But it can't be beatitudo. It can't be the happiness that deep down we're all seeking. Okay? Oh, but here's another indication that honor can't be the ultimate good. Notice Aquinas says, who in your society is being honored the most? Are they the very best people? The question answers itself, doesn't it? Age to age. Think of the people who get the most attention, the most adulation. Are they in fact the best? Again, it answers itself. Others have said, you know what beatitudo is? It's power. Power. And again, this has a lot of weight across the ages. Lots of impressive, important people have argued for this, and deep down, there are a lot of people, age after age, who do indeed seek power as their ultimate good. You know, go back to the Tolkien movies and the great Tolkien novels. What's the ring? But a ring of power, right? What are they seeking? What's everybody drawn to? Talk about final causality, right? The minute the ring gets near anybody, well, it's the ring of power. It is indeed something that we all seek. I think in our culture, too, I would correlate power and freedom very strongly. You know, for Americans or many Westerners, what's the supreme value but freedom? Well, see, what's freedom but power, right? Don't tread on me. Don't get in my way. Let me do what I want to do. Go where I want to go. Accomplish what I want to accomplish. And isn't it true that we hate it when people take away our freedom? I do. I hate it. Whether that's in a physical sense, a psychological sense, a spiritual sense. And so, okay, power does seem to be something very alluring. Notice too, please, so keep Tolkien in mind, but also keep in mind, in the Gospels, the great story of the temptation of Jesus. What's the highest temptation? The third temptation. The devil takes him to a high place and shows him what all the kingdoms of the world in one glance, and all these I will give you if you but bow down and worship me. It's a temptation to power, isn't it? So it is alluring, but is it beatitudo? Aquinas says, no, it can't be. Why? Very simple reason. Power, he says, is a source of activity that allows us to attain an end. But beatitudo is an end. You see what he means? Whatever this beatitudo is, it's something that I'm going for, that I want. It's a good that's out there. Power is terrific as a means of attaining ends. Right? You give me the power to do this, the power to do that, the power to attain. But power in itself is not what you want. It's the good that power gives you access to. Right? Therefore, power can't in itself be beatitudo. Okay, so it's not wealth, not honor, not power. Here's the fourth great candidate. And I think everybody, from a spiritual standpoint, it's a really helpful analysis. Because all of us, we're all sinners in this room, I trust. We're all beguiled by these things in some way. We all tend to mistake these for beatitudo. So the fourth one, Thomas says, is pleasure. Now, this is a very old philosophical position. It's called hedonism. And don't make fun of hedonism as just like, eat, drink, and be merry. Hedonism is a very noble classical position that says what we all seek deep down is pleasure. Now, it could be pleasure in food and drink and so on, but also pleasure in the arts, pleasure in sports, pleasure in knowledge, etc. So it can be a more refined form of hedonism. But that pleasure, it seems, is this ultimate good. It seems to be beatitudo. Yeah, it might seem that way, says Aquinas, but it can't be. How come? Because pleasure, he says, is a side effect of something much more fundamental. So when I achieve some physical well-being, I experience pleasure as a happy side effect, but it's the health of the body that's really substantive. Or when I make some great spiritual, intellectual, cultural attainment, I might feel a rush of pleasure accompanying that, but the pleasure is just derivative, isn't it, from the substantive accomplishment. So pleasure can't be it. Okay, so where are we now? We all want beatitudo. Everyone in this room, again, this is religious, non-religious, believer, atheist, everybody wants beatitudo. Otherwise, you would not get out of bed in the morning. So what is it? What is it? Well, it's not wealth, it's not power, it's not pleasure, it's not honor. Thomas says, the desire for happiness, for beatitudo, is an infinite desire. Remember I said, we want to be happy all the time and in an unconditioned way, don't we? I don't want to settle over some proximate good, some limited, mitigated good. I want goodness itself. And therefore he concludes, beatitudo cannot be any good in this world of wealth, pleasure, power, honor, anything else. None of that can satisfy this longing of the soul and of the heart, this questing, this searching for beatitudo. It is only in God. Listen to his quote. Hence it's evident that nothing can lull a person's will save the universal good. And this is to be found not in any creature, but in God alone. Now, can I submit to you, everybody, this is the moral wisdom of the great biblical tradition. And the roots of this go way back into the scriptures themselves. But this is the way Aquinas analyzes it philosophically. What we want cannot be met by anything in this world. Just as what the mind wants, it does not correspond to any particular bit of knowledge within the world. The mind wants to know unconditioned truth. The will wants the unconditioned good. That hunger is at the source of religion, it seems to me. That opening up of the questing mind and heart is what it's all about. Okay? Now, can I turn from that little philosophical analysis to the Bible? And I want to share with you a story that I've always loved. And I think it speaks precisely to this point. It's a story from the first book of Kings in the Old Testament. The story dealing with Elijah and the priests of Baal. Now, as I tell the story, you might remember it. So during this period, Israel had gone over to false worship. So King Ahab, remember, so Melville calls his, Captain Ahab. And poor Captain Ahab, because we hear in the Bible that Ahab is worse than all the kings of Israel combined. And knowing the rogues gallery of the kings of Israel, that's saying a mouthful, right? So Ahab is a really bad guy. More to it, his wife, Jezebel, has now drawn him into the worship of false gods. So Elijah the prophet rises up. We know nothing about him, except he's from the little town of Tishba. Now talk to specialist historians of the ancient world, they don't know where Tishba was. So we know nothing about Elijah. He suddenly appears on the scene, and he challenges Ahab. He says, the drought we're having here in this country, it's because of the false worship. Very interesting thing now in the Bible. Never read the punishments of God as somehow like arbitrary. God's just having a bad day, and so he's imposing this arbitrary. No. It's spiritual physics. The garden, go back to the beginning. What's the garden symbolic of? But flourishing, the flourishing that God wants for his people. Adam and Eve expelled from the garden, not capriciously, arbitrarily, but as spiritual physics. When we fall away from God, we tend to fall into lifelessness. That's the point. And so the drought now that Elijah points out is a function of false worship. Now I'm going to dwell on that for a second. Keep Aquinas in mind and beatitudo and the seeking of the good, right? And keep in mind those substitutes for beatitudo: wealth, pleasure, honor, power. The very beginning of the book of Genesis, we hear about God making the heavens and the earth, right? And everything's coming forth in this orderly manner. Mind you, please, not science, high poetry this is, right? So as things come forth in this orderly way, let there be light, and there was light. Let the earth come forth, it came forth. Let the earth, teem with animals, and so on and so forth. The stars and the planets all come forth in this orderly procession from God. Two basic moves are being made here symbolically. First of all, the author is dethroning all these false claimants to divinity. Think for a second of, the planets and the moon and the stars, mountains, animals, the river, etc. What do they all have in common? They were all, at one point or another, worshipped in the ancient world. These are all gods worthy of worship. The author of Genesis is saying, no. These are all creatures of God, not God. Don't worship them. Are they good? Yes. And the conglomeration indeed is very good, but they're not God. Don't worship them. Now, here's the second point he's making. And here the Catholics will understand what I'm talking about. As these things come forth in an orderly manner, one after the other, in a stately procession, what does that remind you of? It should remind you a bit of the Mass and of the way the ministers of the Mass process in. Well, and the Mass, of course, the roots go way back into the Jewish temple rituals and so on, right? There's the idea. Nothing in the world is God. Don't worship them. But everything in the world is meant to turn to God in right praise. That's the purpose of creation, is to turn to God in right praise. And who comes at the end of this procession? Well, there's the human beings, right? Adam and Eve. Who comes at the end of a liturgical procession? But the priest or the bishop, the one who's going to lead the praise. That's the idea. Dethrone all false claimants to divinity. Nothing in the world is God. Don't worship those things, but rather let all those things be part of a great chorus of praise led by human beings who can give voice to the praise of creation. Does that make sense? That's the biblical vision. That's the biblical vision.
Thanks for listening to the first half of Bishop Barron's talk at Google. Again, next week, we're going to share the second half along with the audience Q&A, where you'll get to hear some of the questions that Google and YouTube employees asked Bishop Barron. Before wrapping up, I wanted to encourage you to check out our newest film and study program. It's titled The Mass, and it's one of the most beautiful things we've ever produced. The Mass is a 6-part study series with Bishop Barron where he goes through each component of the Mass, sharing what it means and why it matters. Learn more by visiting mass.wordonfire.org. In just a few days, the Mass film series will be available on our Word on Fire digital platform, and then a few weeks after that, the DVDs and other study materials will be widely available. But to learn more and to see some sample clips, be sure to visit mass.wordonfire.org. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week for the second half of Bishop Barron's talk at Google.